Welcome back to Spellbook Studies. So far over this series, we've talked about some new cards, some old cards, some strange cards. So this time, let's talk about a really old card. We also haven't really talked about many consistent cards, so I guess that'll be a first for this series too. As we take to the skies for this episode, we are heading all the way back to 93 with some alpha printing. I mean, come on, guys, it's Lightning Bolt. It's like the only perfect card from those early years of Magic's history. And when I say perfect, I don't mean it's over the moon's powerful. Don't get me wrong, it's a great spell, but it's the perfect ratio of mana cost to effect, and it's simple and straightforward, but so very effective. At least in most formats. Lightning Bolt is the heart and soul of Burn. Modern it's in, Pauper it's in, it's got spots in Legacy, Delver, and Budget Burn. I know absolutely nothing about Vintage, but I'm sure it's got a Budget Burn option somewhere in there too. But what about that other eternal format, Commander? For the longest time, I have heard many people say that Lightning Bolt isn't good enough for Commander because it doesn't do enough. It doesn't deal enough damage to actually act as a removal spell, and everyone's life total is too high to make an impact on a player's life total. But that whole concept relies on the assumption that people are only playing the big stompy spells that the format was once known for. And while that may be true in some matches, I think the format might have changed more than people think. So let's give you some context for the discussion, and then force you to sit through all the data I've collected to prove or disprove my theory. Honestly, this all started with the work I've done for the Reliquary Tower. When you have to sift through deck lists to check for stream performance, you begin to notice patterns that you wouldn't normally have. Like how the average mana value of our deck seems to be from 2.5 to 3.5. I cannot stress how much higher I expected that to be. And if our spells are usually that cheap, then that means that they must be pretty small, which means lightning bolts must kill a major amount of our creatures. But come on, guys, do you think I'd stop? That's just the hunch that got me started. We've only covered the first 2 steps of the scientific method. People think lightning bolt is bad, and my hypothesis is that I think it's good. So let's move on to that data that I'm 100% sure will prove that I'm right. So before I get into the data, let's define what would make Lightning Bolt a good removal spell for Commander. For it to be a good removal spell, it would naturally have to remove a majority of things it could target. And since it deals damage to any target, it has to kill a majority of creatures and planeswalkers. So let's do a quick search. As of July 19th, 2021, there are 1,599 legal creatures in Commander, and 8,660 have 3 or less toughness. So 74.7% of creatures can be killed by Lightning Bolt. My work is done. Lightning Bolt is a good removal spell. It kills more than half of all creatures, which is, in fact, a majority. But Carter, not all of those are going to be playable. Well, fine, Owen. I'll use a different metric. Since Owen doesn't want my job to be over, and the video isn't long enough, I'll admit that just putting creatures with 3 or less toughness into Gather doesn't actually show anything. It doesn't take into account what's played, just what's legal, and when's the last time you saw somebody play a Thelanite Monk? So let's take a look at precons. They set a precedent for the format of what Wizards wants to be a standard deck. So if Lightning Bolt is good there, it has to be good in the format as a whole. Let's look at all the creatures and calculate the average toughness for each year of precons, and then find the average of those averages. What? I'm off by 0.52? The average creature won't die to Lightning Bolt because its toughness is 0.52 higher? I didn't make a whole video just to be wrong. So let's find a different metric. After all, a big part of what makes Commanders fun is the plethora of decks you can craft yourself. So what are people playing a lot of? Okay, let's look at EDH Rec. If they show the top 100 most used cards in the format, of those 118 are legal targets. Makes sense because top 100 is mostly removal and ramp because they're uniformly needed. Okay, 10 of those 18 are actually answered by Lightning Bolt. Okay, it kills a good chunk of those, but those are all mostly mana dorks and not actually things I'd want to remove. So let's look at the saltiest card list. Of those 100 cards, 37 are possible targets, and it answers 14, so less than half. Great. Real talk for a moment. I know so far I've been putting up this bit of not wanting to be wrong. But the truth is, all the information I've drudged up so far was my first attempts to prove that Lightning Bolt could work. And I was doing it so I could dodge doing the hard thing and actually spend a decent amount of time collecting hard data. So let's move forward and do the actual research so I can finish the video and give you a real answer. See, Commander is a very base-by-base game, so in order to determine Lightning Bolt's viability, we're going to have to look at some very specific playable creatures to make sure it can actually remove the things that you're going to want to remove in the game. The top 6 decks on EDHREC are Artifacts, Life Gain, Aristocrats, Wheels, Lands, and +1/+1 counters, each of which has a list of the 48 most commonly used creatures in those deck types. So that will be our sample size of determining whether Lightning Bolt will be good. Because definitively, if Lightning Bolt is good in the most played environment, then it is most likely playable in most environments. While Lightning Bolt's success varies against each deck, it still relies on the same 2 data points to prove that it might be effective: how many threats it can kill, and how many effects it actually answers. See, Lightning Bolt might be able to kill Laboratory Maniac and Thassa's Oracle, but because Thassa's Oracle puts a triggered ability on the stack that Lightning Bolt can't interact with, the spell really only answers Laboratory Maniac and not Thassa's Oracle. And we really want our removal spells to answer creatures. In the end, of the 287 creatures, subtract 1 for Hull Breacher, 174 of the creatures are killable, but only answers 133. Which unfortunately means Lightning Bolt only answers 46.4% of creatures. God, it's so close! Unfortunately, by the standard I set, I am wrong. Lightning Bolt is still too small for Commander. By the thinnest of margins! Some points to make still in favor of Lightning Bolt. It does still kill 52.1% of the 1,154 format legal commanders, and does surprisingly well against Planeswalkers. Of the 97 Planeswalkers shown in those same 6 deck types from EDHREC, the Reliquary Tower considers 73.6% of them reasonably killable with Lightning Bolt. And for the over 200 that are legal in the format, the ratio is about the same. Do me a favor as this video closes. As somebody who is clearly a fan of Lightning Bolt, even though I cannot endorse it for every Commander deck, take a moment, consider what you play. If you can abuse its low mana cost, please consider it for your deck. If it adds extra synergy, consider it for your deck. If you're color restricted and maybe don't have access to some of the premium removal spells, consider it for your deck. And the next time you play, take a look at your inner meta. Because depending on how many Planeswalkers you see, how many must-remove commanders there are, what creatures become your biggest problem, and the number of times your opponent has killed you while at 3 or less life, just ask yourself the question, could Lightning Bolt have saved me? And if enough time passes, and the format changes just a little bit more, the answer to that question might be a yes, just enough to make it playable. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Spellbook Studies. I hope you found this self-contained argument insightful and helpful, and I'd love to see your opinions in the comments of whether Lightning Bolt is Commander playable or not. If you enjoyed this episode, consider liking and subscribing to support the channel and making sure you get notified when the next installment of Spellbook Studies debuts. And last but not least, I'd like to send a thank you over to Reliquary Knight Martin. I was unable to edit this episode of Spellbook Studies and he took over that role. So if things look a little different from usual, that would be why. And if you just so happen to prefer my editing, you can actually join the Reliquary Tower Discord server from the link in the description and tell Martin or myself that directly. It would boost my self-esteem. Everyone, thank you for watching and please have a good night.